If you ever sink into a ball pit, use this simple trick to get out fast. So a lot of people think ball pits are just fun and games, but most don't realize how dangerous they can be. Most people try to stand up or crawl their way out, but that actually makes it worse. So what should you do instead? I'll tell you, but if you love ball pits, tap the like button, click subscribe, then share, and when you tap the copy link, this amazing thing happens. First, lean back and spread your arms and legs out like a starfish to distribute your weight. That helps keep your body on top instead of sinking. Then slowly slide or scoot your way towards the edge, keeping your body flat the whole time.
When's the last time you were in a ball pit?
Well, let's hold on that thought for one second, because I need to introduce everybody to this episode of Lucky Paper Radio. Hello, my name is Andy, and I'm here as always with my co-host, Anthony. I would bet $1,000 has never once been in a ball pit in his life, Maddox.
There must have been a time.
What do you mean there must have been a time?
You know, childhood.
But your childhood, you didn't go to, like, the McDonald's play place at childhood?
No, but maybe perhaps a Chuck E. Cheese.
You never would have been to a Charles E. Cheese.
I
know your family.
I think it's possible.
I guess you could have had friends that were very different from you, but I can't imagine you were going to a Charles E. Cheese.
I can't with confidence say that I've been in a ball pit.
That's what I expected. I have not been in a ball pit since I was maybe 6.
That sounds normal.
But I was definitely in a fair number of ball pits when I was growing up. I went to the McDonald's play place. We were usually a Burger King family, but for some reason my family was always into the second worst brand. It was like, oh, we like Pepsi and we like Burger King, when Coke and McDonald's are clearly the best ones. Boy, if my extended family ever hears this, they're going to be so mad.
Yeah.
I really can't let my extended family, all of whom work for Pepsi for their entire careers, hear the beginning of this podcast. I'm sure they won't. It'll be fine. Never been in a ball pit, though.
Let's go with no.
I win $1,000. What a great profit. We got a special guest on this episode. It is not just Anthony and I. We are joined by Jane, the lady of the ball pit, McKinney. Hi, Jane.
I'm sitting in one right now, so I don't know what you guys are slacking on.
You've got your home recording ball pit for your home office?
Oh, yeah. My mic setup might be garbage, but this ball pit is pristine.
I'm picturing a ball pit that is literally just like the size of an office chair, like 2 feet by 2 feet, but it is like 3 feet deep, and you're like sitting in it.
It's built into the office chair. Yeah,
there you go.
I'm picturing, where do these things even exist that's like a steamer, like a sauna that's like one body sits in and it's got a thing that covers a hole for your neck?
Oh,
do you know what I'm
I think
picturing?
that's called an Instapot, and it's not meant for you to go in it.
I've definitely seen saunas like home saunas that are just the size of like a phone booth, but you go entirely in those. The thing you're describing, I have a vague memory of. Why would they even exist? Why would you want your head out of the sauna?
Yeah, so why are you sitting in one of those but full of balls?
Have you seen those photos of someone who needs to like give their cat their like kitty asthma meds? So they like put plastic garbage can over them upside down and then spray it in there so that the cat has to breathe it. That's what I'm picturing.
Yeah, they hotbox their cat with a nebulizer.
It's crazy. I'm learning so much in this episode already.
Turns out cats hard to make breathe specific air. You must just change all the air around the cat.
Exactly. I'm the modern day Miss Frizzle, bringing you unsanitary workplace conditions for your children and nebulizers for your cats.
They gotta clean those balls, probably.
They gotta.
Hose them down with some soap water.
Golf ball cleaner, one at a time?
Man, I loved the golf ball. I would occasionally go golfing with my dad when I was a kid, and I loved the golf ball cleaner. I thought it was so fun.
I can say with confidence I've never used a golf ball cleaner.
See, I would have definitely bet that you had much more likely used a golf ball cleaner than have been in a ball pit.
Definitely not.
You played water polo, though?
I did play water polo, but not because I was like cool and athletic. It was because it was the weird hipster sport that all the weird hipsters played. I think we played like one real match ever.
That's really surprising because when I think of water polo, I think of cool and popular people.
Yeah, no, it wasn't that. But, I mean, I was there, so maybe. Who knows?
We gotta do a bonus episode where you just talk about your illustrious water polo career.
I think I'd survived. It is a difficult sport.
This episode, Anthony, we are talking about the ball pit. This is Jane's... I mean, I guess you released this cube to the public, like what, January or February of this year?
I released it to the public early March because I'm pretty sure I was bedridden from surgery while I was first releasing this to the ether.
That is but my memory too. I know you would remember exactly when the date was for that reason. And it was something that I played at Inland Northwest Cube Fest. Did you play the ball pit at Inland Northwest Cube Fest?
I've not yet played the ball pit, no.
And then I think most notably, this cube was the absolute breakaway hit at the CubeCon this year. It was top of the rankings for most of the time. And then, occasionally the data-generated vintage cube sneaks up there. But that doesn't count. People being excited about vintage cube is never a breakaway hit. It was the ball pit that everyone was excited about at CubeCon this year. And I really wanted to dedicate an entire episode to talking about this cube because I think it is brilliant and fascinating.
I think it's a pit full of balls and that people just can't help themselves from crawling around in there.
Let's talk about the beginnings of this cube, where you got the idea from, how it came to be in the early days. Where did you get this idea for the cube? And I guess maybe also tell people the conceit of the cube.
I'll start this off by saying if you want a more long-form thought process on just how this cube came to be, there's a Recross the Paths episode with Cade about the inception, mostly, of the ball pit. But for those of you who either haven't listened to that or won't listen to that, the abbreviated version is that the ball pit is a cube where you can cast every single card in the cube face down as a copy of Chromatic Sphere. So every card in the cube functions as though it's a modal double-faced card with Chromatic Sphere on the back. That is the central conceit that makes every single thing about this cube work. The two other modifications to it that are different than a regular draft are that this is a desert cube. You have to draft all of your lands. And this is also a cube where you draft 60 cards and then have to run every single card that you drafted. So you sit down, you draft 4 packs of 15, you end up with 60 cards, and then instead of deck building, you just built your deck. You shuffle up, you get paired with your first opponent, and you go straight from drafting into playing whoever's cross-pod from you. The no cuts allowed stipulation only works because if you draw a card that is not one you would normally want to run in your deck, you can just pay 1 mana of any color, cast it face down as a Chromatic Sphere. And then not only did you get rid of the card that you didn't have a reason to play, now you also have basically a 1-pip fixing artifact on the battlefield so that you can cast the other spells in your deck. I should probably actually say the rules text of Chromatic Sphere just to make sure, but Chromatic Sphere is a 1-mana artifact. It was originally printed in Invasion, but I run the Mirrodin printing for the vibes mostly. It's a 1-mana artifact that has tap, pay 1 mana of any color, sacrifice Chromatic Sphere, add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool, and draw a card. This artifact is, it's a pretty famous artifact on its own because there have been a ton of decks throughout time that have trouble with mana or that want to have incidental artifact synergies or that want things being sacrificed, and there's so many little gears to turn with this one little artifact. And the ball pit first started as me brewing, I think, 3 different cube projects in my head. One that was built around a card called Energy Chamber, which puts counters and charge counters on things. A different cube based around Myr Enforcer, which is a 7-mana 4/4 with affinity for artifacts. That cube was going to be, before 100 Ornithopters kind of set the stage for what if you had a cube that only had 1 of a creature in it could be. I was thinking about, what if you had one that only had Myr Enforcers, and that's not quite as resonant.
I like that you swung all the way to Myr Enforcers. You went right past Frogmite. You're like, no, none of this. We're going right up to the Myr Enforcer.
That one's a story for another day, perhaps.
I feel like the Myr Enforcer cube could play out to have a very specific play pattern, which is just like, who gets to affinity first, and then here are the cops. It's just like,
and then bonk,
one person just shows up with a huge pile of creatures.
Both of those cubes, the Energy Chamber cube and the Myr Enforcer cube, had things about them that I still really like the thought of. And, someday I'll return to design space that is similar to those. However, in thinking about all of these things, I ended up deciding, well, the big things I'm looking for that I haven't experienced yet is I'm looking at all these colorless spells. I want to draft a cube where every card that I draft is playable, but not because there are no colored pips in the cube. Eventually, that design goal coalesced around the concept of, no, really what I want is a cube where you have to play everything that you draft. Then I thought, okay, well, then it has to be a desert cube. And if it has to be a desert cube, then I want to not solve, because I don't think it's necessarily a thing that can be solved, but I want in this environment to be able to manipulate some of the things that people struggle with in desert cubes, namely not having enough lands or having too much lands. And it was when I hit on that issue for the cube where you have to play everything that you draft that I thought, well, what if every single card you could do something else with it instead of playing it as what it was? I considered various lands. I considered every card having an Ash Barrens on the back, and eventually I settled on every card having Chromatic Sphere on the back, and then I was like, oh, that's a goofy little ball. And as soon as I leaned into, this is just a goofy thing. It's a fun new design space, but it's definitely tongue-in-cheek. It's definitely something that is aware of it not feeling like the cleanest Magic possible. Then the ball pit coalesced in my brain.
There's a lot I love about this cube that I want to talk about, and I'm also really curious to hear about all the feedback you got from people at CubeCon and what you envision the future of this cube to be. But I think one of the most important things to talk about first is actually your attitude towards updating and maintaining this cube, because based on the cube description and things you've said in the Discord and elsewhere, you have a very sort of relaxed approach to maintaining this cube and are like, no, I'm not just going to add a card because it's a good fit. I need to have a copy of it. And if you want me to put it in the cube, then you can send me a copy, or guess what? It's just not getting put in. And you've said that you have no desire to tune this cube and to dial it in and make it a polished, refined thing. Can you speak to your relationship to the cube design process and how you see maintaining this cube?
Definitely. The disclosure at the start is that everything in the ball pit's cube description is turned one notch up from what reality is, both in terms of how things function in the cube and in terms of how I interact with it. So I do still say that I curate this cube. There are cards in it that I have intentionally sought out a physical copy of to include in there. However, those exceptions kind of prove the rule in that if I seek out a card, I'm still looking for it locally. I'm still trading for it. I've never just bought cards off of TCG Player for this, especially because you just shouldn't buy cards off of TCG Player these days. It's more that the concept of this cube for me is not one that I think ever needs to reach a certain specific point that I have in my head. Meaning I have other cubes where I have much more rigid ideas of what I want that cube to be like. So, I have a unsleeved peasant cube that is only cards in the modern border, and that cube has much more rigid design goals because I use it to teach a lot of people how to draft. So I want to always, every single time that I draft that cube, I'm thinking about what are the cards here that are hard to learn from? What are the cards here that are good to learn from? What are bad beats in a way that teaches people something? What are bad beats in a way that doesn't teach people something and just makes them want to go collect Pokemon cards instead of playing this dumb box of cards? And the ball pit, all of those things are much more secondary to me to the generalized experience people are having. Are people having fun? Seems like they're having fun. Okay, cool. That means that either I'm in a good direction or I'm already in a good place, to stretch the metaphor further than it needs to be. If you're looking at a ball pit that's full of all these different colors of balls, I don't think the average person who owns a ball pit is thinking about, oh, well, it looks like there's more green in there today than there was yesterday. And okay,
if there's more green in my ball pit, I'm definitely asking some questions.
Tell us more about this imagined psychographic of the average person who owns a ball pit. What's this person? What's this character like? So
if someone tells you they own a ball pit and tells you their name is Spike, you might not want to get in that ball pit. That's rule number one when it comes to psychographics. You don't know what's under there. Psychographics is an interesting angle to approach this topic with, because it's not that there isn't a specific psychographic that this cube is designed for. And I think most curators would say, oh, no, my cube isn't curated towards any specific psychographic. But I feel like if you dig a little bit, that's not always quite true. For example, my tabletop cube, which is a very simple, recognizable cube in a lot of ways, is, to me, more designed for people who have the mentality that means they often call themselves a spike because they want simplicity for the sake of skill expression. The ball pit is a cube that I want everyone to get a bit weirded out by, but I want everyone to learn something about what they enjoy about Magic when they play this game. And for some people, that's because they sit down and they go, this doesn't feel enough like Magic for me to me, that's a very valuable thing to learn. We're in a day and age where there are so many different ways to play Magic, and a lot of people, especially the ones that I interact with, are looking for ways to play Magic differently, specifically so that they can get away with some of the hangups they have with the current direction of Magic. And the ball pit is a cube for some people where they sit down and they draft it and they go, okay, I figured out my far bounds. This is enough of a difference in the way that the rules function and the specificity of the cards included and the goofiness of it in some ways that it's a boundary for them. Whereas other people have drafted this cube and come to me and said, okay, this cube is doing a thing that I like because that's a thing I like about Magic, and this cube has somehow encapsulated it for me. And that could be being forced to scrap around with things that you drafted, even if they're not ideal for you, in a day where most of the time when people draft a cube these days, there's a non-zero number of cuts that they are able to make pretty quickly if they've drafted a cube of that type before, and that's just not the case here.
Yeah, I mean, I love the way that sort of informality carries its way through everything, like through the gameplay of like, okay, you're forced to play with stuff you don't really want, and then through your sort of like approach to updating, it's all very coherent, and even, the presentation of you have this awesome graphic on the overview. Do you think also that mechanic just makes it very easy to be flexible in the way that you're updating it? Because if you put something in and it's like doesn't quite work, it's still going to end up in people's decks, so it's not going to just be like a card that's going to be languishing in a sideboard, but it's also something that, people aren't going to be stuck with because they can just cycle it away effectively.
I would say that meaning the unique nature of everything being castable as a chromatic sphere, it both helps and harms my curation process. I just yesterday went through all of the photos uploaded to Google Drive by Gwen for CubeCon, all of the different deck picks and draft pool picks for the ball pit, which in a way I very much enjoy, are the same picture. You take a photo of your draft pool, and then instead of taking a deck picture, you just shuffle it up because your draft pool is the deck picture. And that makes observing people's decks from a results-oriented gameplay tuning manner a little bit more difficult than it can be in some cubes. Because, if you see...
a lot more difficult, right?
If you see someone like Sam Black running a card like Horrible Hordes, which I'm just going to read this card because it kicks absolute ass.
I think that before you read it, people just need to go look at this card, because this is one of the most interesting looking cards from the history of Magic.
People need to go make a wallpaper out of this card, and I mean a physical wallpaper, and plaster it up in whatever the room in their house is that feels the most like a fever dream, because this thing it's bonkers. I cannot describe it in ways that I think do it justice. But it's a 3-mana 2/2 artifact creature. That's basically it. It's from Mirage, and it has Rampage 1, which for you sickos who were born after the year 1800, Rampage 1 says that for each creature assigned to block it, beyond the first creature, it gets +1/+1 until end of turn. So even if it gets blocked by a creature, it's still a 2/2. It's only if it gets blocked by multiple creatures that it becomes greater than that.
Is that the Kool-Aid Man in there?
Don't worry about it.
It's the Kool-Aid Man if he were on meth and also crossed with the way they used to draw the moon in early 1900s cinema. He's whacked out.
This card, yeah. I have never seen this card before, which does not happen to me very often, and yeah, it is wild.
Yeah, that is a Kool-Aid Man that you would say, "Oh no," if he broke through your wall.
This is like when you watch.
Oh no!
It's like when you watch the pilot of The Simpsons, and you're like, "That's what they look like." This is the pilot of the Kool-Aid Man.
This is definitely the pilot Kool-Aid Man who's talking in the wrong voice.
That's an interesting challenge that. When you're looking at the decks that people are drafting in most cubes, you get a lot of information about what's in the sideboard versus what's in the main deck, and you also really see clearly this is what my plan was, and sure, I ended up with a couple off-color cards, but this is what my strategy is. And here, people are still drafting.
And you know what spells they
presumably.
cast.
Yeah,
you don't know what spells they're casting when you look at someone's pool here, because they could have just played certain cards always as chromatic spheres, and you would never know.
Right. So there's a lot more potential for noise in the system when you're trying to evaluate what's actually being successful here. And you note that this card is a frequent 3/0, but is that because Horrible Hordes is a great card, or I don't know?
Yeah, you said it's a frequent 3/0, which means you're looking at the list now. Horrible Hordes shows up in more 3/0 lists than almost any other card other than Myr Enforcer or Zolfir Void, which, first of all, is because I run a billion copies of all of those. And also, part of me is like, oh, I should number them or something just so that I could say this specific one shows up more than elsewhere. But, this isn't 100 Ornithopters. I don't need to be doing that. Horrible Hordes is not a good Magic card. When you draw it, you are basically always playing it face down for 1 mana to fix your mana for whatever else you're going to cast that turn or the next turn, or playing it face down for 1 mana so that you can dig for a card that is anything better than Horrible Hordes.
Yeah, even if you're Hellbent and you top deck Horrible Hordes, you're just paying a 1 mana tax to draw the next card.
Yeah.
You're not playing this as a 3 mana 2/2.
The Ball Pit's a funny cube because I have seen people play it because they literally just needed a blocker that turn and they didn't want to risk trying to draw into a cheaper creature.
Mm-hmm.
I wish I had a video of it, but I have seen someone play this before because they were like, well, my opponent's low and we've done so much crazy stuff this game that life totals are also pretty low, and I can give this creature haste if I play it because of whatever that Kamigawa era land is that gives a creature haste when you cast it.
Hall of the Bandit Lord or something?
Yes, Hall of the Bandit Lord. They were like, well, I can give Horrible Hordes haste with Hall of the Bandit Lord, and then I've got like 2 equipment sticking around, so I can just deal them like 8 damage in 1 turn with Horrible Hordes. So they should have drawn a better creature and used that to kill the person instead. But the fact that it was a creature that had to be in their deck means that I would be pretty comfortable saying that's probably the only time Horrible Hordes has killed someone in the last like 25 years of Magic the Gathering.
A dubious honor.
A dubious honor. The point of this cube is not just to run god-awful cards and force people to try to make things work with them. That was more the premise of the original Enforcer cube that I had in my mind. But it is a cube that does have some stinkers in the list that are only... Well, I mean, honestly, the only reason that I'm able to get people to do shit with a weird card like Horrible Hordes is because the rest of the cube pulls them in enough that they let me. They're like, okay, sure, Jane made this funny thing that I'm willing to draft and have fun with, so I guess if I draw a card that I will never want to cast, I'll put up with that.
Which is one of the things I love most about this cube, is the presence of the Horrible Hordes, or the Sarpadian Empires Volume 7, or Lord of the Pit even, which is, I think, a joke because it's the Ball Pit. But, Lord of the Pit also not a card you would expect to want to cast a lot here. And yet, all these cards you've reported, people put them in their deck because they're forced to. You literally force them to, and they're like, fine, I'll just play it as a Chromatics for every single time. And then they don't. Sometimes they're like, actually, you know what? The board is empty, and Lord of the Pit is a 2-turn clock, and I'm just going to play a Lord of the Pit, I guess. Or I'm going to play Sarpadian Empires Volume 7 because you have a big creature without any kind of evasion or trample, and I'm just going to want to jump block it indefinitely, right? Like, the fact that you force people to play with cards that they otherwise would probably never in a million years choose to main deck, and then not only do they play with them, but then sometimes play with them in ways they wouldn't expect, I think is one of the most beautiful things about this cube.
I love that you pointed out those specific cards because, first of all, yeah, Lord of the Pit is the Lord of the Pit. And Sarpadian Empires is a card that, it's a large mana artifact that you have to put more large amounts of mana in to make 1/1s of the, weird forgotten creature types.
Yeah, whatever weird creature type you want, as long as it's not a normal one.
Yeah. As someone who loves to facilitate games being played smoothly for people in the ways that let them focus on the game, I intentionally never include tokens for Sarpadian Empire any time that people play this cube because I want to see what they come up with. If they manage to make tokens off of it. And not infrequently that has ended up happening. Lord of the Pit, I actually thought would be a decently played card in this cube because it's big, it has flying, and most importantly, it has flying and trample. And in this cube, that closes out stalls pretty damn well when it can't be targeted by artifact or enchantment removal. And Sarpadian Empires, I was like, well, I don't run a lot of things that make tokens because I do not want there to be very many tokens gumming up the works here. So both of those are cards that are definitely ones I first considered because of their charisma, for lack of a better word. Their riz.
Baby Gronk? I heard he got rizzed up by Livy. Is that correct?
Yeah, both of those are cards that rizzed me up, and I was like, oh, I will legitimately consider whether or not your humor and your vibe is worth adding to this environment. Both of them passed that test with flying colors, and I'm happy to say, after CubeCon, both of them are actually decently well-performing cards, which also very happy to see. I can call those ones well performing and not just frequent 3-0s because of actually seeing there be tables in which Lord of the Pit was out wrecking somebody's face, or having someone like Sam Black, come up and say having a token maker was really good, and having it actually have been important.
Let's talk about the experience you've had at CubeCon, because you drafted this cube at Inland Northwest Cube Fest. My read was that was kind of the first time it was drafted by a lot of new people. Maybe you played it a couple times through the playgroup locally, but that was in some ways, it's like a coming out party to get played by a bunch of other people. And I know there was a couple things you wanted to adjust after that weekend, mainly related to like the length of games. And I'm curious how those changes played out and if you were happy with how the cube played at CubeCon.
Inland Northwest Cube Fest was the first time that the ball pit was drafted in person by people other than Spokaneites and people that I am like friends with from college or beyond online. That included a lot of other cube curators, which for me was ideal because it meant that I valued their feedback as a curator even more than I did from just someone who happens to be a good Magic player. Those were the two biggest things that I wanted to tweak the knobs of coming out of Inland Northwest, were specific card issues and length of game issues. Both of those can be encapsulated in the locus cycle. So Cloudpost being the infamous one, Cloudpost being a land, its land type is locus. It's one of those goofy ones that has a land type. It enters the battlefield tapped, but you can tap to add 1 to your mana pool for each locus on the battlefield. So, if you have a locus out, it's worse than a waste because it enters tapped and it only adds 1 mana for itself. Once you have 2 of them out, they're tapped ancient tombs that do not deal damage to your life. Once you have 3 of them out, they are really strong. Most importantly, they save for each locus on the battlefield. So if you have 1 and your opponent has 1, yours just got more than twice as good as a land. And conversely, if you have 1 out and your opponent has a bunch of them out, yours gets better, but all of theirs get better. And Cloudpost is just, it is the perfect albatross around my neck from the first time that this cube was drafted in a space like that, because Cloudpost is a card that really fits the design goals of this cube for me to have a bunch of them in there, because it's a weird card that doesn't see play in a lot of cubes because you need to have multiples of them for it to really do its thing. But it has a low floor and a really high ceiling in a way that the ball pit allows cards to have, but a lot of cubes sometimes struggle with. And I ended up struggling with it after that event because in my local drafts and the few online drafts I had seen, everybody seems to value Cloudpost roughly similarly, which was probably a little bit lower than they should, but still pretty highly. So most people would end up with 1 or 2 Cloudposts in their deck, or a thing that they could turn into a Cloudpost, like a Thespian Stage. That was super fun, because then randomly, seemingly, sprinkled throughout the games, you would happen to have turns where both people suddenly had a lot of mana that they didn't necessarily plan for happening at that specific moment, which meant then people went, oh shit, and they started playing every card in their hand face down to schematic spheres and digging for the best things in their deck and casting the big cards that they usually didn't get a chance to.
That's a great point that you always just have stuff to do with big mana, right?
Oh, it's so fun. If you haven't managed to make big mana work in the ball pit, oh my gosh, it's such a fun experience because you feel like you're Memnarch or one of the artificers of Magic, where you're just, every single card you have is useful, and there is nothing in your deck that you cannot take 1 or 2 game actions with, which for a specific kind of sicko is extremely rewarding. You're drawing cards, you're feeling like that woman in the GIF where you're doing math in your head while things swirl around your head. And then Inland Northwest happened, and at Inland Northwest Cube Fest,
Keldon ruined it. Keldon, you ruined everyone's fun.
We were all having fun in the ball pit.
Honestly, not just Keldon. I can blame other people.
You can blame me too, but it's because Keldon told me.
Keldon had, going into this event, told a few people that he thought the Cloudposts were one of the strongest things you could do, especially if you leaned really heavily into them, which that was just a true fact about the cube at the time. That was one of the strongest things you could do in a cube that was not particularly focused on making sure that you couldn't occasionally do really strong things. But at Inland Northwest Cube Fest, in 2 out of the 4 matches that were played with it, one person managed to get enough of the Cloudpost or Cloudpost adjacent cards that their deck really, really popped off. Humorously, one of those people didn't actually go 3-0. They only went 2-1, but that was because they got blown out by someone who did another thing that was really powerful. And then there was another match in which Andy and someone else... Do you remember the name of your opponent?
I do not remember the name of my opponent,
matchup?
no.
Okay. It might have been Harrison.
Oh, you know what? It definitely was Harrison, now that you say it. It for sure was Harrison.
Harrison being the person who went completely undefeated at this event. As in, he went 3-0, 3-0, 3-0, 3-0. Crazy record.
Which I only lost that match because...
You had more cloud posts,
I had
but he drew better.
So many more cloud posts. But the problem was that meant that, like, he got all the benefit of having drafted a bunch of cloud posts because he just happened to draw, 1 or 2 of his... I think he had 5 maybe, but I had 14.
What?
Yeah. He drew...
Andy didn't have 14 cloud posts, but Andy had 14 ways that you could turn a thing to act like a cloud post.
Between Cloud Post, Vesuva, and Thespian Stage. Nearby Planet. I also had a couple of Deserted Temples too, which are not strictly Cloud Posts, but also make a bunch of mana when you have Cloud Posts going on.
Have we also mentioned that there is some pretty significant singleton breaking in this cube?
Well, yeah, there's 480 chromatic spheres. This is a cube that does break singleton on a ton of cards. I'll talk about that in a second after this, because the way that I break singleton, I think, is very interesting in this cube.
For sure.
But notably, the lands break singleton more than any card other than those 2 that were seed crystals for the cube, Energy Chamber and Myr Enforcer. But after Inland Northwest Cube Fest, I severely dialed back the number of Cloud Post and Cloud Post copying abilities in the cube. I still really like what those abilities allowed to happen in the cube. That being said, it was just not worth keeping them in. When enough people started to have the cloud posts be what jumped out to them, then I decided that I wanted to cut them back because honestly, they were not on their own interesting enough for me to want them to be that powerful. On their own, they're a mana producer, and there are so many things in this cube that you can do that are not tied up in first making sure you have an absolute buttload of mana and then being able to do whatever it is that they do, that it just wasn't worth it. There's still enough of them in there that you can have a single strong Cloud Post deck, but it'll only be strong. It won't be backbreaking. There were no 3-0s at CubeCon this year that were entirely off the back of a Cloud Post based synergy, and I think there was only one of them that even leaned into that with any heaviness at all. So change number 1 I made post Inland Northwest was cutting down on the Cloud Post deck, for lack of a better phrase, and then also cutting a few other cards that fit into that vague category. The other big thing was just that the ball pit is a cube that I want to be decision rich, but not be completely backbreaking in how much of a mental load it is. And because I am the designer, I am someone who loves chromatic sphere. I'm someone who loves all of these weird, wacky artifacts and who has more practice than some players in assessing when these cards are good compared to other cards. Honestly, that was the other thing that I oversaw when I first built this. I oversaw that other people would not value Cloud Post highly and end up with them fairly spread across. And I honestly, I thought that the cube would be less mentally taxing on people than it was. And immediately upon drafting this with more people, I got the feedback of, Jane, this cube is really fun, but like my brain is overheating the entire time because there's so much to pay attention to. The ADHD, everything is sparkly. I'm looking at so many different fun things, but also my opponent's lands do a ton of different things because you're running all these cool, obscure lands that nobody gets a chance to run anywhere before that usually don't do much, but when they do something really, really matter. And the other axe I took to the ball pit after Inland Northwest was just saying, I am going to take the worst offenders of the lands for doing too much in a way that just makes people's brains busy when most of the time all it does is tap for a colorless land. I'm just going to cut over 30 of these and replace them with Zolfir Voids. Zolfir Void being the colorless land that scries 1 when it enters and does nothing else. It's a really good card to have in your deck because you don't need a lot of colored mana, and it helps you in a one-time way just look at the top card and decide if that's something that fits your game plan or not. Both of those changes I made got very positive feedback in the initial testing that I did in Spokane before taking to CubeCon, and then at CubeCon itself. There were still games where people felt overwhelmed mentally, but way more than had been before. There were still games going long from people doing big things with big mana and, tanking on whether to cycle a card or not, but there were less games going to time than there were at other ones. So I'm so far very happy with those changes.
Yeah, you mentioned games taking a long time, and I was actually curious, do you mean in terms of like number of turns, or just in terms of people are taking so many game actions and have so many decisions that the games just take a lot of time?
Usually one or the other, meaning there are games that go to a lot of turns because people are failing to assemble the thing that lets them win. There are also games where people tank for a really long time because early on in the game, things are already happening quickly. Unlike in the usual matchup where things are happening quickly, where you only have a few decisions to make that turn on what you do to either stall them or stop them. Instead, you have the option of ditching every single card in your hand. So the games that I observed usually either fairly quickly started bumping up the number of turns that were happening because turns were going back and forth fairly quickly while people assembled things, or things happened quickly enough that they then tanked longer on whether or not to get rid of chromatic spheres.
Yeah, I mean, that's really complicated. And I know some people have done sort of cubes where you can play things face down as a land, which is another way to solve some of the kind of like, some of the questions that you have about like forcing everybody to play every card. And even that can be extremely decision challenging just because having every card be a modal card is a lot. And here, every card is a modal card, and also a modal card that's going to draw you new cards. So there's this sort of like a
more
statistical analysis of like, what am I likely to draw, and is it better than this thing that's in my hand? I haven't drafted this yet, but I definitely see how it can be extremely taxing.
One of the knobs you can turn in that scenario is reducing the number and variety of situational cards. So one of the biggest decisions I made with this cube, which no one has actually mentioned this to me, that they've caught it, so part of me is like, ooh, I don't even know if I want to point it out.
No, it's inside scoop.
Inside scoop for Lucky Paper Radio is that there are only 2 counter spells in this 480 card list, which almost functions as there being 0 counter spells, because one of them is Stifle, which, gorgeous magic card. I love Stifle. It is 75% in here because of Phyrexian Dreadnought, and 25% in here because it's a goofy resonant magic card that sometimes does cause some very fun things to happen because there's otherwise so few counterspells in the cube.
And 2% of the time, it's just the rudest thing you could possibly do ever, of stifle your opponent's turn 1 chromatic sphere.
Well, so I am looking at the list now. Stifle, the printing on that is wrong because I traded for the conspiracy version. Here we go. Okay. We're live updating here.
I'm refreshing. Okay. I'm refreshing.
Now you can refresh.
New Stifle just dropped.
Yes, I see it. Much more appropriate for this cube, I say.
Counter target, activated or triggered ability. Mana abilities can't be targeted.
There you go.
Chromatic Sphere's activation counts as a mana ability. Yes. I love the goofy old art, but this one fits the more Mirrodin vibes better, and then also, says you can't counter a Chromatic Sphere. Same with Pithing Needle. Pithing Needle can't stop Chromatic Sphere from happening. But anyway, the other counterspell is Who, What, When, Where, Why.
Which no one even knows is a counterspell.
Correct. Who, What, When, Where, Why has a mode that is 2 and a red, destroy target artifact. It's the one in the top left corner. In this cube, it's the one this is usually cast as. It has the mode for people that I like to hang out with, which is 3 and a black, and it destroys target land. But it does have a mode that is 2 and a blue, counter target creature spell. It's just a decidedly mediocre creature-only counter spell. And most people look at that card in their hand when they draw it, and either immediately know if they want to keep it in their hand, or immediately know if it is the next Chromatic Sphere that they are going to cast face down. Because Stifle, most people draw that, and they're like, I am not going to hold on to this and wait for that weird edge case when it's relevant, unless I can see on board that my opponent's going to do something crazy that I need it for. So it immediately becomes their next Chromatic Sphere. It's not taking up brain space in their head. Who, What, When, Where, Why, most people draw it, go, cool, I'm going to play 2 and a red and blow up an artifact. And if not, they usually already know what they're going to do with it. The point of me bringing up those 2 counterspells is that there aren't that many cards in this cube that people have to think too much about if they want to keep it for a specific situation, because the situation is generally either is this a creature / permanent that is on rate enough that I want to play it right now? If yes, I'll hold on to it. If not, I'll bin it. Or is this a removal spell that, well, is this a removal spell? Because if it's a removal spell, people generally hold on to it because they know that the way they win is they do a strong thing somehow and keep their opponent from doing whatever the thing is that's stronger than what they're doing.
If I'm understanding you correctly, you're suggesting that these situational cards, you believe, add substantially to the complexity of like how to navigate a turn?
I think that a lot of situationally complex cards would add too much complexity specifically to the ball pit. Because, you know, if you draw Stifle in a deck that you have more normal Magic, you don't have the opportunity to get rid of it. It's a card that what you're thinking about is, how will I make use of this, or will I make use of this? Not, should I try to make use of it? Because you don't have the option of getting rid of it. Like in this cube, there are very few combat tricks also, which I know combat tricks are fraught for a lot of other reasons.
No, we love them here, universally. We both love them.
This is a cube that in a lot of ways, I wish I could run more counterspells with, because they can help clear up some board stalls. They're things that don't get to exist in a lot of places. You can just get rid of them if they're not relevant, which is one of the big huge issues of a lot of combat tricks is you can't get rid of them if they're not relevant. You could get rid of them here, but when I ran a few more of them, they caused people to tank so much because they by definition have a very low floor, meaning it does nothing except lose you card parity, and a fairly high ceiling in that you can blow someone out in a way that there would be no other way to do it without a combat trick. And right now I think I'm down to like 2 of them in Grain, and even they are potentially on the chopping block because they cause people to tank so much.
You mean the person with the combat trick, or just the presence of them in the environment? Or maybe some
there
of
are
both?
so few of them that so far it has been the person with them.
Got it.
But the more that there become, way more it causes the opponent to tank as well.
It's funny because I would have maybe assumed the opposite, right? Like, I'm imagining if I have a bunch of very context-specific situational cards in my hand, that's almost much easier for me to say, like, well, am I in a situation where Stifle is good? And if I look around the battlefield and see no good activated abilities or triggered abilities, and I say, okay, fine, just turn it into a sphere, compared to just looking at a hand of, like, okay, here's a bunch of threats or, like, you know, proactive cards that have different rates, and I have to evaluate whether or not this is better than the average threat I might draw off the top of my deck if I just cycle this away for a sphere. Like, the combat trick is a good example, right? I'm going to attack. Does my opponent give me an opportunity to build them out with a combat trick? If yes, I do it. If not, I cycle it away. Or, you know, if I think it's better to do that next turn, I'll keep holding on to it to hope to do it again next turn. But that's actually been my always biggest complaint about combat tricks is that, like, it actually feels like it's a very obvious way to use them. It's not actually tricky at all. It makes you feel kind of big brain because your opponent blocked and haha, how foolish of them. But it's very clear when someone blocks if the combat trick is going to blow them out or not. So it's actually an interesting sort of perspective to hear you talk about how people might be going a little maybe too deep in the tank about, like, will this be useful in a future turn, instead of just being like, is it useful now? If not, sphere it away.
I have 2 comments here because I agree with everything you've said. And I think the thing I said before is relevant in that for Stifle, I do think most people know whether it's going to be relevant and they bin it when it's not. That is why it is one of the only 2 counterspells in this cube. Imagine if instead of Stifle, it were Force Spike. You know, Stifle is a card where you often know whether or not it is even remotely going to be possible. Force Spike is a card that causes people to think, can I make this work? When the other opportunities that they can get rid of it. Because if you have a Force Spike in your hand and, you know, it's turn 2 in this cube, there's a pretty decent chance that on turn 3, your opponent is going to either cast a 3-drop or is going to cast a Chromatic Sphere if they don't have one out to use its mana to cast a 2-color 2-drop. There's no guarantee. They could also have the right mana to cast a colorless 2-drop and then use their remaining mana to play a Chromatic Sphere, in which case your Force Spike does very little. But it's that opportunity that takes up time. And it's the same with a combat trick. I agree with you that I think if you are a, like, seasoned Magic player, you know when it's a good time to cast a combat trick. Yeah, like Mirror Metal, which is on the chopping block. You know when it's a good time to do that. The thing that's different in this cube is that when you draw that card, you're not only deciding, is it a good time to play this card? You're deciding, do I even want this card? That is what causes people to tank, because instead of doing their normal thing they do when they draw a combat trick, which is, this is a dead card until an opportunity presents itself in which it's very obvious that it's not a dead card. They have that thought process, but they're also thinking, do I want to deal with that metric? Let me think through the times where this could be a useful card, because now I have the ability to get rid of it, which I've never been given before. I'm normally stuck with this card. They have to think more about whether the card is going to be useful than they would otherwise, because they have to do the math in their head of, do I keep it? Do I not? Is it better to blow them out with this or just draw a threat myself?
The force spike example is a good one, because I think in that situation, like, I'm keeping it if it's like super early in the game, and as soon as my opponent has any more than like 5 or 6 mana, I'm just going to get rid of it and assume that I would be lucky to get to like nab them with it. But I can definitely see how people would be in the tank about that and be like, did I see an X spell in like the previous game that they're likely to tap out for at some point later, and just like really trying to next level. So I can definitely see how that could become a problem. And I think also like counterspells are a good thing, where it's like counterspells are a thing I like to have essentially not present in an environment like you have here, or present enough that you can like reasonably play around them.
Yeah.
And at such a big cube with 60 card decks, you'd have to like have quite a few counterspells before people be thinking about playing around them at all, you know?
Who, What, When, Where, Why is marked as on probation in my cube, not because it's weird, it's the only silver bordered card, it can blow up a land, it's hard to read, it has rules things. The only reason it's on the chopping block is because it has the when mode, which counters target creature spell.
Yeah.
I really don't like that being in the cube, because functionally right now this is almost a cube without counter spells. Almost, but that's such a big difference. And if I cut it but leave in Stifle, Stifle doesn't counter any spells. It only counters activated or triggered abilities.
Yeah, I don't even think of that as a counterspell, to be honest. That doesn't even feel like a counterspell to me.
No, I mean, it's mostly something that you use to your own benefit. But this cube could never have Force Spike in it for so many reasons. But the biggest reason is I never want opponents to have to think about what they're doing with a card like Force Spike in mind. Mm-hmm. I try to eliminate as possible most of the things that would make someone wonder, do I cast this spell and then a Chromatic Sphere, or do I cast a Chromatic Sphere and then this spell? Because that's just one level of thing that I just don't want to add to the environment.
Yeah, that's a lot. That's a lot to think about for sure. I'm curious to know what the future holds for this cube. So I think the feedback you got from CubeCon was overwhelmingly positive. I think you said earlier that this is a cube you're not interested in like refining or polishing down to a particular given state. You just want people to have fun with it and get to have the experience. And I think you can say you've handily succeeded at that. Like, this is definitely meeting your goals. So what does the future hold? Are you going to continue to make changes to this cube? And if so, based on what? And what are your goals?
I have 2 competing goals in my head for this cube, which I might honestly just alternate between those goals. The first is that this is not a cube I want to polish towards a specific shape, but it is a cube that I want to make even more fun for the people that play it. And arguably, you could say as a cube designer, that's the shape that we aim for all of our cubes to embody, is the one that is the most fun for the players. But it's much more amorphous in the case of a cube like this one for me. In that regard, post CubeCon, there are some tweaks I want to make around the few ways that you can reanimate cards in this cube. I want to tweak some of the cards that allow you to do that. I want to add some other cards that both make that more enjoyable of a thing to do yourself, and also some ways for opponents to interact with people who are trying to reanimate things themselves. That's a gear that I want to turn that I haven't turned as much as I want to yet. On the other hand, I also like the concept of this cube changing over a fair number of its cards. This is a cube, as I think one of you mentioned at the start, that I could put basically any card into. And the tension for me is, do I keep the ball pit at a place that is comfortable and most people that play in it have fun, it's wacky, where some of the cards in it become known as ball pit cards, which is, in talking to some cube curators, I have already had that happen. I've had people talk about a card and be like, this looks like a ball pit card because it is in the list there and not elsewhere, and it fits that vibe. That's a fun, resonant thing to have, but I would also love to just occasionally say, okay, it's ball cleaning day, I'm going to swap out 150 cards from this cube, because that would be a technical annoyance for me to update the lists and to go through the cards and physically change things like that. But that's a thing that in this cube I could do way more easily than I could in any other cube. I could just take half of all of the colored cards and a bunch of the artifacts, put them in a pile, put that in a box labeled the cards that I took out of the ball pit on day, month, year, and then put in a bunch of other cards and like flag those in a file as the cards I put into the ball pit on day, month, year. That would let me, anytime I want to, reset the ball pit to the slightly more chaotic, slightly more rough-edged nature that is what drew some people to it in the first place. I love it being smoother. I love games occurring on a faster pace, and for what maybe I'll call the core list of cards in it, I want that to be relevant. I want there to be a version of the ball pit that I can just, take to a convention and only have one game per pod go to time. That's a object that I would enjoy having my hands on, is just something I can take to a convention and have other people play without feeling really bad that I'm forcing the judges to go through the interactions of how Panglacial Worm works or about what to do when every single game is going to time. If you ever check back in on Cube Cobra and see that 50% of the cube has changed, that's probably because I've just decided it's time to throw a new batch of balls in there and have twisted those knobs again. I do have right now a stack of cards in my Magic hutch that's probably 80 cards high that are either cards that were too strong for my first batch of the ball pit or just didn't feel right in a version of the cube where those power outliers were toned down a little bit. So there could be a crazy ball pit at some point for a month or two just to see what happens with it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't hate that idea of, even if you wanted to be really sort of explicit and formal about it, having sort of, this is the convention edition of this cube, and I've taken out some of those things that are problematic for judging or problematic for timing just to make it work at an event well. But yeah, you come like hang out on a weeknight and we're relaxed and not so flexible, or not so have the specific demands of time, and you can do some weird or wacky stuff. And I think that more cube designers could be open to that.
The thing that most makes that difficult for me is that one of the greatest joys of the ball pit is that holding the cards feels really nice. I mean, they're real cards. There's no proxies since I took it to CubeCon. But even when I'm messing around, I usually don't proxy cards because it's just half of the fun of having an old card that nobody plays with is having the actual old card and just knowing that it's been in a box for as long as some of the drafters present have been alive and finally has a home, or weird wacky foil versions of things that most people haven't seen before, like the Junior Series Glorious Anthem. That's a card that you know where it is at the table once it's been opened, because whoever opens it goes, Jesus, what is this? I didn't know they made foils like that. And you're like, oh, okay, they opened the Glorious Anthem. But it's not a crazy powerful card, so it's okay that people know where it is. And I just simply do not have the time, the energy, or the money to maintain multiple physical lists of this or swap back and forth. And I could today, after this call, just like put together a digital list of ball pit. I'll call it 0.5 because it's definitely a regression, not a progression, that has a ton more power outliers and is even more off the walls, and games either win even quicker or go to time even more consistently. But I personally, unless a specific like online draft community says, hey Jane, will you make us a digital version of the ball pit that does X thing, I don't know if I would get around to it.
Your choice in card printings is definitely a big part of this cube. Your taste is very clear and comes through in a really powerful way. I have never seen this version of Rise from the Grave or Devil's Play or even Vault Scourge. Like, all these cards are just, they're a real joy to look at, and they capture this particular era of promo.
I adore that era of promo.
It's kind of hard to describe, but they all have a certain quality to them that is very, very cool.
Having you just said it's hard to describe and me very much agreeing with that, I'm still going to try to describe it, which is it's an era of promo that fits what to me is one of the hard to encapsulate design goals of the ball pit, which is they're not very fussy about what they're doing, but they want to do it well regardless. And like the Vault Scourge promo, like it's got a big freaking yellow watermark thing in the corner. It's just like, okay, play. Like, sure. Someone who was in the Play network would know what that is. Everyone else is like, it's ugly as sin is what it is. And yet the yellow of the play matches the yellow emanating from the eyes in the art. It's a very resonant piece of art that matches the frame that it's in. It's a black card that actually looks black. There's so many things about that you're just like, this is a good Magic card. And the fact that it has a goofy little thing on it makes it feel like it's tongue-in-cheek, not that it's trying to do something else. And I will not make this a podcast about me bashing any specific types of Magic cards that I dislike, but there are a lot of Magic cards out there that either I feel like try too hard to do a thing or want to do a goofy thing, but don't also commit to doing it in a way that is aesthetically pleasing and fits the color and design goals of those cards.
Do you have any final reflections on the Cube, especially considering feedback from CubeCon, that you want to get in here before we wrap up?
Two final thoughts, one of which is just to thank everybody at the event who was willing to give me feedback, because honestly, this is a cube that can be intimidating to give feedback on, because most people, the first time they draft it, think, I don't actually entirely know what you can do in this cube. They'll draft it and they'll know what they could have done better, maybe, and what they saw that they didn't know how to stop. But they often don't know if they could have stopped it and they just didn't pick up the right cards, or if they just didn't see the right elements to interact with a certain thing. So it can be hard to go up to the cube creator and say, hey, I do not know all 480 absolutely wacky cards that are in this list, but I'm still willing to give you honest, genuine feedback on it. And the people who came up to me at CubeCon gave me very polite, very concise, very actionable feedback, which was generally just telling me how things felt for them, what felt good, what didn't feel as good. Thank you, all of you. That really does influence the ways that I'm able to make changes to this list. And the second thought is just the thing that most was fun for me about CubeCon was just people coming up to me with like the grin of like an 8-year-old and just saying, I put World Slayer on Darksteel Colossus.
I still can't believe that happened.
That's incredible.
And they'll just say a thing that happened. They won't describe I don't know if that guy won. I can only assume that he did. But he never told me. He just said, I did this, and it was awesome. And as someone who does like games to end and does like how people interact with both winning and losing to matter, I care about that way less than I just care about how much fun people are having. And the person who managed to assemble Cauldra on one of the many days in which my token box had disappeared from the draft and they didn't have tokens, which of course I hadn't included a Cauldra token anyway, because if someone managed to pull that off, I wanted to make their own, and now I have a nice little signed by both of us Cauldra token of the person who managed to pull it off, who lost one of the games where they managed to assemble Cauldra anyway, because they did the fun thing and they won, and then they did the fun thing and they lost, and all of those stories make a project like this worth it. This project has been very fulfilling for me just in my own creative endeavors, but taking it to an event is where I really want to hear people's feedback, because if I take something to an event, it's for them. It's for the people at the event. And I want to know that they had either a good time or an intellectually challenging time, and ideally both, with a cube like the ball pit. And people definitely told me that they had both of those experiences, which was very rewarding.
Well, thank you so much for sharing all these reflections with us, Jane. This is definitely the cube I am most excited about recently, and it's inspired me to maybe work on a new cube project. And I know a couple other people that have been inspired by the ball pit to work on ball pit adjacent projects. So.
It's horrible children. We can call anything spawned by this part of the horrible horde.
There you go. Great. I welcome the moniker with open arms.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I love to see sort of, I know we've done a couple episodes where we've taken an individual card and sort of used that as a starting point to brainstorm designing a new cube. And I love how you've sort of taken a couple tweaks of the mechanics, you know, the modal DFCs, these few key cards, and then even like altering the deck size and sort of following a similar sort of pathway to how do I make an environment work based on like a few initial sort of stipulations.
Don't be afraid to start with a weird nucleation point, I guess, is my feedback to people. You know, get very comfortable making a list in Cube Cobra with cards you do not own and just finding ways to make that spark joy for you. And the last little thing I'll say about cube design is that the ball pit, I already mentioned some of the ways that it started, which was largely mirror enforcer and energy chamber. But because of the specific vibe I went for with the ball pit, I let its first maybe month or two of development be entirely physical. Meaning I dug out every copy of Mirror Enforcer and every copy of Energy Chamber I had, which at the time I think was only 4 Energy Chambers and maybe 8 out of the currently 16 Mirror Enforcers. And I put those in a little pile in my hutch. And then every day, if I happened to be going through magic cards that I already had, I would just say, that looks like a card that feels right in my hand, in the same hand that holds these other cards. And I'd just add it to the pile. Once I had like 60 cards or so, I put them into a list in Cube Cobra and then messed around with cards I didn't own and hunted down local copies of them, that sort of thing. But for a cube this casual, I really enjoyed just having that nice little physical pile, just being like, this is a baby ball pit right here. And it doesn't look like much of anything yet, but I can hold the entirety of it in my hand and flip through it and get the thoughts about Magic cards that only enter my head when I'm holding the physical cardboard. That was a very fun, very unique experience.
Of course Jane has a Magic hutch. I bet it's cute and charming as hell.
Put your cube in the Magic hutch, let it bake for 1 month.
It has 4 sections. On top of it is the flat expanse where I hold my playmats and potted plants. And then under that is and a fake cat skeleton, which someone gave me. And then underneath that is the big open section you can see from the couch that has the antique French-looking clock and the broken New Zealand doesn't exist world map clock that we love Emily got from college and we've held on to because it's just resonant in how goofy it is. Under that is all the actual Magic cards, which don't matter. And then the bottom of the hutch is the extra storage where I hold my dry rice, sesame oil, and the occasional light container of potatoes that I need to keep out of sunlight.
And you call this the Magic hutch, not the...
This is the Magic hutch because it's a hutch that contains 95% of my Magic cards.
Sounds like you're prepared for the apocalypse with everything you need in that hutch.
Yeah, just put some straps on that hutch, throw it on your back, and you're good to go.
All of those things are edible, push come to shove, so...
Well, Jane, thank you so much for sharing this with us. This has been a great reflection on a great cube, and I hope it has inspired our listeners as well. All the music for this show is produced by DJ James Nasty, and the show is edited by Matthew. All the Magic cards are produced by Wizards of the Coast. This podcast is produced by thinking really hard about Magic cards and speaking into microphones about it. Thank you, Anthony and Jane, for the gift of friendship and for the gift of Cube.
Thank you for having me on.
Thanks for a delightful time talking about the ball pit. I learned so much about ball pits.
Was it about the cleaning schedules for the balls?
For ball pits.
Yeah, we really need to get more into this. I should have gone out and done my urban recon and found wherever the last existing ball pit is.
We went to the last
region.
existing Chuck Entertainment cheese.
Yeah, and we found a human body.
Yeah, we got to do a ball pit draft in a ball pit somewhere, someday. That's got to be on the bucket list for the ball pit.
I told a few people this before CubeCon itself, so I felt bad that I then didn't coalesce it from just being too busy. But I was going to have there be a, tiny ball pit in open play. I kicked around a lot of the ideas of, I have some friends in Madison. I could find someone who has, an inflatable kiddie pool and then just have to acquire the...
Simply acquire 300 balls.
Yeah, simply find them. And the only things that, because, I would have been comfortable talking with event staff to find a way to do that they were comfortable with from a legal standpoint, given, the DashCon ball pit infamy, et cetera, et cetera. The only things that stopped me from doing it were the price and the crippling inability to support the production of additional plastic waste.
Correct,
of sourcing those balls. I just was not willing to go about that.
I don't know. I just Googled ball pit rental and there are options.
But
then I'm supporting them having them.
Yeah, that's going to cause them to buy more plastic balls. You're always, unless you can find the recycled secondhand plastic balls, you're always part of the problem, a cog in the machine.
I'm building a cardboard pastiche of a thing I think shouldn't exist. And if that doesn't describe cube design, then it probably shouldn't. There are better ways to describe cube design.